Well, good evening. Good to see everyone out tonight.
How you feeling? Well, you're out and about.
Before we get into the lesson tonight, since I keep going up right to the last minute every week, and the kids start coming in on us before we get to close with a prayer, we'll start out with a prayer tonight. That way I know we'll get that covered. If you will, bow with me. Lord, I just want to thank you for this day. Thank you for allowing us to be here tonight to study together and discuss thoughts on your word. And we just pray that you would guide us through our study and be with those who are over in the annex and in their lessons. And we're thankful for all those who are willing to teach and spend time to prepare for all of our lessons. And we just pray that you continue to bless them and Lord, be with those who are not able to be here with us tonight for whatever reasons. We know you know their needs better than we do, and just pray that you would bless them. Lord, thank you so much for Jesus and all that he's done for us and continues to do for us. And we ask all these things in his name. Amen. So tonight we're on lesson 10. And the way I really like the way he presents things on this topic in this chapter, and I don't know that I'll do him justice as we go through this. And I hadn't been real sure how to approach this lesson the way it is structured, but we'll see how it goes. And this is a topic that I guess I wouldn't say doesn't apply to some of us, but it's going to apply to all of us differently, I guess, and maybe be more applicable to some of us than others, because we are talking about marriage tonight. So we're probably all in different phases of that if we are married, and then there's some of us that aren't married. So it's going to everybody's going to get something a little bit different out of the lesson tonight, but I think everybody hopefully will get something out of it. So in talking about marriage, let's just to kind of get our juices flowing, think about our wedding ceremonies. Do we make a big deal out of wedding ceremonies typically? Yeah.
I got married as a court, man.
And right, and there's some that even today still do that. And then there's some fathers that try to talk their daughters into doing that and tell them they'll just give them some money for the honeymoon and go with it. But I would have gone for that myself. But so a lot of the stuff applies different to everybody. But in general, we do tend to and in varying degrees make we put a lot of effort into those wedding ceremonies, do we not?
You think Adam and Eve had a wedding ceremony?
I don't know. I thought about that, and as you say that, I didn't have time to write it all down, and I didn't dig into it too deep. But I was just kind of, I kind of wondered about that myself, and I did do it, and it's something that you could do just for fun if you're curious. Get on your computer or phone and just kind of do some Googling about histories of marriage, wedding ceremonies, and that sort of thing. And you'll find some interesting stuff about, because I kind of wondered, how did we get to the point where we have the big dresses and the tuxes and all of that. And there is some stuff out there on the history of that and where that came about, some of it. I know one of the things I read said at one point in history, before now, what's the wedding dress color for everybody now? White. And prior to that, and I can't remember who it was. I think it was over maybe in Europe or England or somewhere. At one time, red was a popular color, which
in Korea.
Okay, so in certain countries, yeah. So that's, of course, I'm a guy. I don't keep up with that kind of stuff anyway. But that was something that I never really thought about. But you'll even find where just in the general world itself, at what point in time where it turned more into like a church building setting with officials and that sort of thing, whereas, I guess some countries in points of time is more of a secular thing, and not necessarily the religious side of it wasn't brought in.
You're talking about a wedding ceremony, how, things, I guess, it can be a large wedding ceremony, it can be a small, just
Yeah.
really simple. Going back to Genesis, when God created Adam and then he created Eve, to me, if we want to talk about ceremony, maybe they didn't have, the dresses and all that, but when he made Eve for Adam, to me, it seemed like, there was that bond already right there.
Right.
If you read in the book,
Yeah.
the way that the book reads about that.
And he gave them some instructions at that
Yes,
point, so it's a good
so
point.
that was, to me, that reads like, if we want to go by ceremony, that was a sort of ceremony that God has, made for them, but not to the extent maybe that we go these days.
Right,
You
yeah.
can
Yeah.
blow it out there.
Yeah.
Or you just can't make it as small and tiny as it is.
Yeah, and it goes all over the spectrum today, like you said. There's some people that go all out, and there's some people that keep it pretty simple, which none of that really matters. Is kind of what you want.
Yeah, Bailey.
But we definitely put emphasis on that day, just in some form or fashion, right? And we all keep up with, or at least we better know how long we've been married, right? That's an anniversary, a celebration for us. So why is that? I guess is the point I'm getting to. Why do we put an emphasis on that? And
Not me.
Well, this is an important day.
yeah,
It's a change of your life.
yeah, right. It's a changing point,
Another important day is when you're baptized into Christ.
right?
We don't put as much emphasis on that.
Yeah, that's probably a whole nother lesson.
But Zach, back in the Old Testament, they had, the ceremony, you was betrothed and you had, just think of all the long time the
Yep.
ceremony went.
Some of their stuff lasted weeks,
Yeah,
and
weeks.
Think about what was Jesus's first.
You feed all them people and all that stuff for all the time. You think these weddings are expensive back then? You had to do
And I'm sure probably not everybody back then did that, because like you said, not everybody could afford to, but you would definitely have records of that. What was Jesus's first recorded miracle about? It occurred at a wedding feast, and it was because they'd been feasting so long they run out of wine. So I had thought about that, but that's a good point. So changing gears a little bit, this whole quarter we've been talking about, renewing our spiritual life. What does marriage have to do with that? Why are we talking about marriage, and how does that come into play with renewing our?
The bride. The church is the bride.
Yeah.
Jesus is the bridegroom, and we're supposed to be prepared for that wedding.
Right. Yeah. There is definitely lots of parallels between our relationship to God and Christ and in marriage.
That's an oath that you do before God. An oath.
Right.
When you're getting married, you take an oath
Yeah.
before God. So, and we're still taking an oath before God about being, a faithful member to the church.
Right.
Marriage is supposed to be a permanent thing, so you have to work at it, and just like you do anything else. And so you want to keep things new, fresh,
Yeah.
and not lose interest.
Right. Yeah. And that's, I think, going back to the whole putting an emphasis on our wedding day and making such a big deal out of it is it's intended to be a lifetime commitment and a permanent thing, which is why we put such an emphasis on that day. And we don't plan on doing it again necessarily. So, and trying to think how to ask this question, but as far as the other things we've talked about with renewing our spiritual life, which is all about being better servants of God and living better lives, how much does our marriage, those of us that are married, how much can and does that affect our spiritual life and being able to improve all those other aspects that we've talked about?
It could greatly improve it, because there's two of you working for the same company.
Yeah.
It should be.
Yeah. It's going to have some effect on that, right? One way or the other, isn't it? So, you know, if we're, you know, I guess the real point I'm making is it'd be hard for us, those of us who are married, to really talk about improving our spiritual walk without talking about marriage and improving it. At whatever point we are in our marriage, you know, can always stand improvement, and as we'll talk a little bit later, and Ms. Betty's already kind of mentioned, it's, you know, no matter where we're at, we can always continue to work on it and make it better. And
If you're at odds with one another, that's gonna affect your spiritual life.
right,
You can't help but it affect your spiritual life.
yeah,
It's a growing process.
yeah, it is, and that's some of what we're going to talk about tonight. So we'll keep throwing that stuff out there. Let's go ahead and look, just because of the direction he went. I guess that's one thing, you know, when we talk about marriage, you know, we're going to talk about it tonight, you know, and you could do a whole, you know, quarter or multiple lessons on marriage and family, and we've done that here before. I think it's been a while, but, you know, I can remember us having classes on, you know, marriage and family. So, you know, we're definitely not going to be able to get real deep into it tonight, and for that reason, and then for the reason that I'm not an expert on it, and I'm not a counselor, so we're not going to be able to go into all the details, and not be able to look at all the scriptures on it, but we'll focus on the ones that he's given us and kind of discuss those. And like I said, if you've had read the chapter, you can go back after tonight and read it again after the things we discussed, and maybe it'll mean even more to you. So Matthew chapter 19, a popular set of scriptures we've probably looked at a lot of times, but maybe we'll pick out some different things tonight. Go back to verse 1 there. Now, when Jesus had finished saying these sayings, he went away from Galilee and entered the region of Judea beyond the Jordan. And large crowds followed him, and he healed them there. And Pharisees came up to him and tested him by asking, "Is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause?" So, why did the Pharisees approach Jesus? To test him. To try him. Do you think they really want to know what he thought about marriage and divorce?
The questions were always to,
Go ahead.
the questions were, when they questioned him, always to get him to say something contrary to the law.
Right.
So, time and time again.
Yeah.
Found this woman in adultery, stone her now,
Yeah.
or him to be divorced, or whatever. It's always something that's going to make
Yeah.
him conflict with the law.
Yeah.
So they can accuse him of blasphemy.
Mm-hmm. And were you about to say something, Miss Carol?
So they probably were already doing what they had.
Well, that's a good point. Yeah, they probably already doing. Yeah.
One for the wife for any reason.
Right.
They didn't like it, get rid of it.
Yeah, yeah, and we're going to look at some of that in Deuteronomy again, because we're tying things back to Deuteronomy. But so yeah, they didn't that, you know, they had an ulterior motive. But of course, since we're talking about marriage, why did they choose that to ask him? You think?
That was something they always wanted to do. They was always looking for ways to, where the marriage was in.
Yeah. So
Twisting the law.
They were
Yeah.
various two opposing ways they talk about marriage in the law.
And-
One, they could divorce for any
he was going to have to pick, they were putting him in a spot where they feel like he's going to have to pick sides, right? And of course, the other thing about that, does that tell you that since the beginning of time, have there been challenges with marriage and the marriage relationship? You know, so, and we're going to read in Deuteronomy later, you know, even back then. So, so let's continue reading there. So, verse 3, and they came to him, testing him, asking, is it lawful to divorce one's wife for any cause? He answered, have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female? And he said, therefore a man shall leave his father and his mother and hold fast to his wife, and the two shall become one flesh. So they are no longer two, but one flesh. What therefore God has joined together, let no man separate. Did they get the answer they wanted? No. You know, Jesus showed a lot of wisdom in the way he answered, and I think that's how he dealt with the Pharisees in a lot of ways.
This ought to be a,
Right. Yeah, and that's a lesson I think that maybe if don't get to it, you bring a good point. You know, and I think that's the approach we need to make. You know, a lot of times we look at this the same way the Pharisees do. We look at it trying to understand the divorce and such, but if we focus on the marriage side of it, then the other question wouldn't even come up if we're going to see if we're doing things the way we should.
even though he's actually addressing the physical marriage right here, it's also pointing to the marriage, the bride of Christ is the church. When we divide it out as men and make it all kind of other things, that's the same thing as divorcing. When you get right down to it, there'll be scripture. That hasn't been established yet, but that's where this is all headed. Even though he's taking this, because he said in the very beginning it was 1 and 1. He got all out of whack, but he's never intended it to be any other way. Period.
Right.
Never.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, the church is 1 and 1.
Yeah.
Jesus and the bride. That's
Right. Yeah, do we, as a human race, I guess, throughout time, and even, I mean, we're no different today, do we tend to take things that God's made simple and complicate it?
Amen.
I mean, Mr. Jim mentioned, you mentioned the church. I mean, you drive up down, you look across the street. I mean, there's buildings with different names all over. I mean, we just make, and do we take things a lot of times that I guess God has given us a direction that a lot of times are not real complicated and just totally make a mess of it? You know, you talk about anything in life.
When we talk about the commandment of God and what he has given man, all this says, well, what if?
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
trying to do another scenario other than
Yeah.
what God.
Who is my neighbor? Yeah. It's, it's easy for us to read this and give those guys a hard time, but we're not, we can fall into that trap ourselves. So like I said, we go a whole lot of directions with this, and I hope I don't get just bounce around too much, but I keep going back to the book to try to keep us a little bit in between the lines a little bit. So looking at these verses and kind of breaking down just to kind of help us with some guidance and looking at what he goes into talking about leaving, there in the verse where it says, for this reason a man shall leave his father and mother, and I guess my version says hold fast to his wife. I believe some versions say cleave. So what does it mean to leave?
Means you're no longer under their rule. Get away.
Yeah, you're no longer on it. Maybe sometimes it might take, as Sherry said, getting away.
It actually seems today, it's always happened, but it seems today it's even more when the parents get so involved in their kids' marriage, you're going to have problems. I don't care who you are.
Right.
The parents, they can help insist and they can lead and they can show leadership. When they help too much and start getting involved, and especially siding,
Yeah,
they're gonna create problems, and that's what leave and cleave means.
right.
It's not
Yeah.
just leaving away, but you gotta separate and get your own life, live like the Bible says,
Yeah.
but get your life and not everything your mom and daddy tell you to do.
Yeah, because when you look at it, and we're skipping a little bit of verse, it goes on to talk about, they become one flesh, and, you got to look at it as, they're starting that household, you got to look at that as a person, it's a new person, two people in one kind of deal that's blended together. And you're going right in, where he went with it with, what is our response, those of us who are parents that have kids that are married or getting married, what is our responsibility to help that new union? Because, we've all talked about, marriage and life in general is challenging. So as parents, we definitely don't want to make it more of a challenge on our kids.
And that's hard to do.
And
I mean,
it's-
you want
and
the
it's-
best you can get for you.
It's hard, because it takes a change on. I mean, some of y'all know more about this than I do, so y'all can give me some advice for the next year. But anytime we go through a change in life, when your kids go off to school and they're not home every weekend and you don't know where they are every minute, I mean, that takes some adjustment as a parent. Well, same thing when they become adults and they get married and go start a new household. That it takes an adjustment, and we have to be careful there, I think, because all the good intentions in the world, but we can make a mess of things if we're not careful. And he gives a lot of good advice in there.
Well, I'll tell you one thing, Zach, do a lot of praying.
Praying is a lot. Praying for them and praying for yourself and how to handle it, and that's a real good point. I mean, that can be true with everything, but definitely comes into play. Praying for guidance and patience and all of those sorts of things. He mentioned several things. Again, as Mr. Jim said, we're not talking about abandoning our kids, but it's we have to be cautious on when we engage and when we get involved, and more of a deal of give advice when asked, and if they don't ask for it, we may have to just bite our tongues and let them figure it out. Similar things when our kids are growing up and doing homework. If you're standing over their shoulder when they're working a math problem, and as soon as they run into a little trouble, you just reach in and say, well, answer that's 5, and then you don't let them work it out in their brain. You're doing the same thing in that marriage relationship. If you don't let them, when they run into that first little conflict, work it out amongst themselves and figure it out, then as those problems get bigger and more severe, then they haven't progressed, and then they've got a really big mess. He talks about less being more sometimes. Maybe ask permission before you do things, and definitely not taking sides in issues. He talks about honoring the integrity of that new relationship, and then too, supporting its he talks about its long-term goals in life, and not getting focused too much on the immediate, things that are going on, if that makes sense.
I think the key word may be responsibility when you talk about parents. That changes, I think.
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't mean you don't love them, it doesn't mean you don't care, it doesn't mean you're not still your children. But your responsibility for them now changes.
Right.
They're your kids.
Mm-hmm.
You're still under your household per se, and
Yeah.
you've got a responsibility to them. Once they leave their father and mother and
Yeah.
set up a whole new deal, your responsibility for that changes.
Yeah.
Your love, your concern, all those things, your example, all of those should stay the same.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have the same responsibility to that, you're not in control, you're not all the advice thing that
Right.
Lisa talks about, I think that's a concern.
Yeah. And it can be a struggle, and especially if we see them struggling, or we see them maybe going a direction we don't think they should go, knowing when to say things and when to offer advice and when not. I mean, can be a tough thing, but
It's also a growing process.
Right.
We got to go through, and we got to go through the same
Yeah.
things, and we got to start to back off.
yeah,
And
You know-
we got to go together.
go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, you know, a lot of times, especially in, say, Christian marriages where, you know, people like Michael and other places have a stance that they won't preach your wedding unless you go through pre-marriage counseling, which sometimes is weeks, sometimes it's a one-day thing, or whatever, and those are good things to go through. But you know, some of those might be a good idea for the parents to have a little counseling session too, so they know how to deal with it. I don't know that that's even a thing, but you know, that might not be a bad idea.
You know, as a parent, it's always hard to, you know, you always want the best for your kids. And lots of times I have to think, when I was at their age, how I dealt with my parents when they, I wouldn't say interfered, but
Right.
tried to put their 2 cents in about the well-being of, you know, of myself, and if I did maybe a choice that they didn't agree with, but it wasn't harmful, but it's not like they would have done it.
Right.
So I tried to always think how I felt when, you know, when I was approached at their age. But you know what? It's hard to bite your tongue.
It is. Yeah, you're right, it is.
See, and where I was going with that is just, you know, the kids are growing up, but yet we are growing up too. So
Right.
we're both are in different stages in life. So it's a learning curve for me. It's
For
a
everybody.
learning curve for the kids, and you know, then it's life.
That's why you gotta pray a lot.
Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, yeah.
That's- I agree.
And when you, and of course, and we kind of, you know, we kind of talked that, you know, we as parents have to be conscious of that, and then of course, that's a thing that the two individuals that get married need to be aware of that too, that they can't go running back home the first fight they have and that sort of thing. And a lot of the time, that's the type things that get covered in the pre-marriage counseling, as they go through those type things to kind of help them with that. But so it's kind of a two-way thing. They have to learn that they're on their own now and have to work some things out. So that may require some coaching on the parents' part to let them know that, well, you know, I'm glad you came to me, but at some point we may have to tell them, you need to go back home and figure that out.
And the best marriage counseling is right there.
Right.
You know, we can say all we want to all the folks and their opinions and all the things they do, and they're wonderful counselors. But we get, when we're looking, seeking counsel, we forget that we got it right here.
Yeah.
If we turn to it and we both yield to it, if we're going to that
Yeah.
counseling, then
And-
we'd have, the problem is we get so self-centered in our
Right.
marriages, it's all about us rather than about the marriage.
Right. And that's,
And if you look at the Bible, it's got an example from Genesis 1 all the way through. It's easy to find and follow. It's just, are we willing to do that? That's
Right.
what gets us in trouble.
and there's several verses that I don't know if we're going to get to them tonight, but toward the end of this chapter that points to that relationship and how they're supposed to treat one another and all that. And then, as we've already said, it really goes back to how we're supposed to treat everybody and how we're supposed to treat God, and then it all blends together. So if we're really putting God first and following Him, a lot of the marriage things fall into place. And going to the cleaving part, you know, there in those verses we've already read, you know, Jesus, when he was asked that, you know, he goes back to the beginning of time, which is an indication of how, as some of us already said, how God had intended it all from the beginning. And there, because again, the Pharisees, he didn't give the answer that they were looking for, and so they pressed him a little more, and throws it kind of back on, well, why did Moses command one to give a certificate of divorce to send her away? So basically trying to, I guess, trip him up. And what does Jesus tell him was the reason Yeah. Jesus changed the word up there though a little bit. I don't know if you caught it. What word did they use in reference to Moses?
Moses forbid.
Yeah. Well, my version says, why did Moses command? I don't know if everybody's version says that, but, and Jesus says Moses allowed. I don't know if y'all's version uses those two different words. There's a big difference in command and allowed, isn't it?
And I think God was the one that allowed through Moses, when you go back and read the actual.
Right.
story about it.
Yeah, yeah.
He allowed it, because that's what they all wanted, which is not what he really wanted.
Yeah, yeah. And he, Aubrey Johnson, I don't know if I can find it now, where it was at. Of course, he talks about cleaving. The Hebrew word basically means to glue. And I guess maybe that's later on, so I might be getting ahead of myself. Yeah, I think.
Hebrew word for clean means to glue.
Right, right, yes, ma'am. And there in Mark 3:24, what does Jesus say there? He's not necessarily talking about, well, I mean, he kind of is talking about marriage, but
Out of the back will not stay.
right, and that goes back to some of what we talked about earlier. You know, if again, why are we looking at improving our marriages? Well, it's because if we're not working toward the same goal, cleave means glued together. I mean, you're one entity working toward the same goal, and if you're trying to go separate directions, you're not going to be very efficient. You know, it's kind of like trying to do something with your arm tied behind your back, or, you know, who wants to have a quarterback that's got a broke ankle out there trying to play a football game? You're not going to be as effective for Jesus if we're not firing on all cylinders, so to speak.
Both of them got to realize they're both imperfect people. You gotta say, if they're not, they gotta learn to love and respect and communicate with each other.
Yeah, yeah. Talking about the one about it being under attack by Satan and being committed. Yeah, it definitely takes commitment. It's and as Miss Betty said, it's something you have to continually work on. I mean, what happens to your garden or your flower bed if you neglect it and don't tend to it? It's going to die, or if you live out where I do, the deer are going to eat it up if you don't protect it with an electric fence or something. So you got to, you know, the same thing with our marriages. We've got to be continually working on them and things, and you know, that's why it's not necessarily in here, I don't think, but I've read in other places. You know, one of the things that people struggle with today, especially. Probably did back then too, but you know, do we tend to put a lot of focus into our kids, and our kids tend, and they're growing up, have a lot going on, sports and school, and you know, so there's a lot, you know, cases of you know, married couples that, you know, they, while their kids are growing up, they spend so much time making sure their kids are getting everything they need, going to ball games, getting them to school, making sure they're learning, making sure they're getting in the right schools, and they may be, the husband and wife are coexisting and might even be working together, but they find themselves focused so much on their kids that then when the kids leave the house, then they're kind of sitting there, well, what do we do now? And they don't even know each other anymore because they hadn't been nurturing that, you know, that relationship and taking that time for themselves to work on their relationship. And that's an easy, and there's other areas where we can, it's not something a lot of times that just happens overnight. It's something that just we kind of drift into, you know, and that's even our spirit tomorrow, and we're not following God today. It's more of a life events happen to us, and we take our eye off of that target, and we just slowly drift, and the next thing you know, you're like a boat out in the ocean. you done drifted off away from the shore and you can't even see it anymore. You know, marriage is the same way. Well, wow, we didn't get very far at all on that tonight. So,
Zach, everybody's talking about, you know, want the best thing for your children. Once they're married, if you really want the best thing for them, that's for them to stay together.
right,
And that's what you need to pray for.
Yeah.
Straight to wisdom,
yeah.
what they need to do to stay together.
And like I said, I encourage you, we're gonna go ahead to the next lesson next Sunday, because me and Mark have already worked out the transition and we're already a month behind. So, we'll go on to the next lesson next Sunday. But I do encourage you to go back, because this chapter is one of the easiest reading chapters in the book so far. And he does some stuff that and puts it in ways that I'd not really thought about it very much. Especially when you think about there in Matthew chapter 19, when he said that was what therefore God has joined together, let no man separate. He has some interesting thoughts on who Jesus was actually talking to there, different possibilities. And when you look at it from that perspective, it's kind of interesting. And he talks a little bit about divorce, which obviously was a problem back then, and again, as we talked about in Deuteronomy, it was a problem, and that's why God allowed it, because it wasn't back there in Chronicles. God didn't set those rules for something that was going to happen in the future. He was, from my understanding of reading it, he set those rules because that was something the people were already doing, and he was putting some boundaries around it for different reasons. And he talks about that in here a little bit, which again, thinking about that puts a little bit in perspective when we start trying to look at the answer for us today. So again, I thank you for your comments, and I hope you got a little bit out of tonight. And again, I encourage you to go read this chapter and think about the things that he's got in there, because it is some really good information. And Malachi chapter 2, there's some good information in the way it's put it there, which is where some of your translation says, how does God feel about divorce? He says, yeah, some of the says God hates divorce. Most of the translation, ESV words it a little differently, but same basic meaning. So, and thank you all for your comments. I believe the little ones will be over here in just a little bit.
Busy.